To our CSI Secrets Community Call. It is Thursday, May 13th. Just note this call is under the Code of Conduct for CNCF. And with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. And prior to us going into the agenda, if there's anyone new that wants to introduce themselves to the community, please go ahead and do so. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. I'll be moderating. Does anyone feel like taking notes?
Yeah, I can help with it.
Okay, thank you, Nish. Okay, and let's go ahead and start the agenda items here. So I don't think Lucas is present. We'll go ahead and table his discussion item for next week. But it is interesting, so please take a look at the external secrets. Just looking at this repo, looks pretty interesting. So looking forward to that conversation. With that, Tommy, you're up, and we're going to talk about the AWS status.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we had an item here to give everyone an update on that. I think Anish and I took a look at the code, and these were the kind of like 7 issues that popped out. And then I believe I don't have the links here, but some PRs in progress to get the integration tests set up. So I think those are just the only things to them getting the AWS provider as listed, resolving that issue.
Okay. Any comments or anything? Are we okay? Sorry, go ahead. Finish.
For the integration testing, I think the interesting scenario is for all the providers today, we run it against kind cluster, and then we use Auth that can work on a kind cluster. But for AWS providers, they need to run it on an EKS cluster so they can use the underlying identity for auth purposes. So in the PR, they have the cluster creation as part of the batch test suite. And some of the recommendation based on review that we added was they can move the cluster creation to a script and do that before the batch test suite is run. But I would encourage everyone to look at the PR and add any thoughts that they have if it can be done differently. And I'll link the PR in the docs.
All right. Thanks so much on that. Let's see. Busy day for you today, Tommy. Next up, we got the atomic writer optimization.
Yeah. Let's see. This was brought up last week about on rotation. If there are no changes, how to not have to then fetch all secrets again. I think this was brought up because the AWS provider has a way to look at secrets in a more lightweight fashion than accessing the secret to determine whether or not it has been changed. And there was one of the issues with the atomic writer is that to make any updates, you have to provide the full update. So I kind of describe this as put patch, and so I provided this kind of like summary of the issue here, and my proposal is that to continue using or to still since we're not using it yet, but to keep the atomic writer as the plan going forward, but that way to implement the optimizations is to, if there are no changes, you can just return empty like a success, but with empty files and nothing will change. And that if there are partial changes, though, you would need to provide still the full view of the mount file system. And then I think in some other discussions, Anish mentions that like providers can still do their own caching to keep values around if they wish, but yeah, I guess my position here is that I would rather reuse the atomic writer than trying to modify it to support kind of like partial updates. Yeah, so go ahead.
Could I ask one clarifying question on that? The way that a provider would know that nothing has changed is based on the versions given for what already exists in the mount, right? So it's not, it doesn't have to like read the file or anything. It's just based on like the versions getting passed back and forth.
Yes, I think I looked. I need to refresh myself here.
I guess to a certain extent, it's kind of provider dependent how they want to determine that. But.
Yeah, because I think it can be difficult to know whether or not like the secret provider class has changed depending on how you're writing stuff in your responses. Yeah, I had a little section here on detecting changes, and I do one description of how you might detect it and detect secret provider changes. But yeah, it can kind of be opaque to the driver depending on, since I think at least like the GCP one and maybe the Azure one too, just write back the secret and the version, and don't write back any information about the paths that the secret was in the. So.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. There probably could be some future work on that note taking, or more like there are some alternatives of like, you know, hey, including versions on the file, like for each file, do the secret and version and note taking like that, which is, you know, I think possible currently, but there's no, you know, explicit direction to providers on how to do that or how they should. So it could be there, but in order to kind of make forward progress on removing the file permissions from the providers, that's my initial proposal.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Any comments?
Yeah, so if people could just take a look at that and leave any comments that they might have. And then the next one is also part of the atomic writer. I got the PR merged that vendors the atomic writer unmodified except for comments describing how it was vendored, and switches to using that for writing the files. So this would be targeting, this would be included in the next release, .22, so that any provider that is returning files through the RPC interface, those files would get written using the atomic writer. And then I'm suggesting here that like providers add that functionality, but don't make it the default functionality until at least version 23. And then at like version 24 later is when we might consider it being required. But just would like some soak time before providers go all in on that, to make it more explicitly opt-in testing to like beta behavior. Yeah.
All right. Any comments or feedback to that? Okay. All right.
Sorry,
and
just real quick. I just want to make sure there's like we capture any action items. So specifically, based on what Tommy's saying, should we open issues in respective provider repos to make sure they track this, or do we want to make sure we create specific gating issues for like say 00023 to make sure we capture certain things as a blocker for 23 release? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think for the 3 providers that are supported now, there are already issues. For the GCP one and Azure one, it's closed. And then for Vault, I will link the issue that's open.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like all the providers are doing it, right? So if one of the providers did not implement it, then how does that impact the driver release?
Yeah. I think it's there are code paths that be like deleted once all of the providers. So first, I think we should probably open an issue with the AWS one, just so that we're like
consistent. Yep, agreed.
And that they're on track probably to get included before. Yeah, hopefully they are included kind of before this all. So yeah, proposing creating that as an action item for the AWS. And then yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe an issue tracking on the driver of like just tracking when it will be required, so that once it's, because like I guess we want it like implemented in the providers as optional, then implemented in the providers as default, and then the driver makes it required at some point. And if the providers haven't made it the default, then it just kind of like blocks deleting code paths.
Right. I just wanted to highlight that making it default in driver sounds like it's dependent on providers, which it makes sense, but also like it kind of sets a precedence to how we roll out features in drivers and this codependency, like, is this okay, right? And if not, how do we, what do we think is the right way, I guess?
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say, from the Vault provider point of view, yeah, we definitely want to have at least one release where it's in there optional, and then one release where it's default. So yeah, we probably want to have at least 2 releases out there before it becomes required for the driver. So I think this, yeah, sounds like that can fit in with the plan outlined here, if that's amenable to everyone. I mean, we're kind of vaguely aiming at monthly releases. What's the cadence for the driver? Is it just as the milestones become complete, or do you have like a time cadence as well?
I think that's a good question. We've just been kind of doing it, yeah, not on a cadence.
Let's define a cadence.
Yeah.
Good question.
I think probably monthly.
Yeah, so far it's been the first week of every month that we cut a release. So the usual milestones that we have is planned for the month, and then like the first week is when we decide, okay, it's a good time to release because all the milestone items are over. But I think, yeah, defining a cadence and maybe documenting it will also be helpful for other users who come and see our report to know when they can expect the next release and everything.
Considering, I think, Rita, you and Anish are the only ones that have done the releases, I believe. I think doing it more than monthly might be, I don't know that we have the capacity to do more than monthly.
I think monthly, and some projects is like 2 monthlies, two monthly. That doesn't make, sorry, too early. 2 months is totally reasonable, given that, you know, PRs and issues take time to address. We wouldn't want to release just for the sake of releasing. So.
So action items, I think, were like an issue, like maybe creating an issue to document release cadence.
The items are there in the notes if you want to just move it.
Oh, okay. Well, I only have suggestion permissions on the doc, so I'll let someone else.
Okay, I'll move on.
Windows Containers cuts their releases on the second Tuesday, I believe, of the month. So I think if it can align with that, it can also pick up those security fixes.
That's a really good point.
And 0.0.21 is the first version that supports the returning the contents back in over gRPC, right?
Yes, that will write it using the like just naive file writer, and the merged one. It has a tested like backwards compatibility. So if a mount is, you know, already has files in it and it is a remount call, it should correctly deal with that. But that is, and that code path should also correctly go if like it went from the provider writing it to the driver writing it with the atomic writer. But that is also one of those things where like it's tested in code, but I would like to try that out more in the wild. But yes, 21 allows you to pass the thing.
Sorry, can you just repeat that for note takers? Driver writing file is introduced in 21, right? But we're not going to require until 23, right?
I think 24.
24. Okay, cool. Thank you. This is why I need you to repeat.
Yeah.
I'm not going to remember this. Okay.
I think default in 23, right?
Well, required means default, right? Or no?
Since the code paths, yeah, it's hard because it's the providers that need to make it default at some point before it goes required, and the versions there are mixed.
Okay, so is that the note above in the agenda? Is that what you meant when you said default until 23? I think I misunderstood that one. I'll highlight it up here.
Yeah, I think the default for the provider, I think that's probably what Tommy meant, right? Like providers implement it and then keep it as an optional feature. So that's what we did for Azure as well. And then probably test with the optional feature flag in the E2Es. And then at the next release, maybe just make it as default and then see if it introduces any issues.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, the one thing I didn't want was providers to see it implemented in 22 and then immediately make it the default. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. Yeah, I think that timeline should be fine for the Vault provider.
So then, just for my own understanding, the end goal here is that no providers are writing secrets by 24. Okay.
Correct.
All right, I think we're good with that topic, unless anyone else has anything to chime in on.
Sure, and I'm just thinking like, let's put like a big warning sign on all the repos or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something to put in bold in the release notes at the very least.
All right. That takes us to the end of the agenda, but hey, I do want to shout out Tommy and Anish for this session at KubeCon. I heard it was 800 plus, maybe even more. So congrats to you two on that.
Thank you. And thank everyone here for making it possible.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a basic question to ask. Maybe someone can answer. Why we never had like a release tag 010? Like we are going till all the way to 22, 23. Like, do we have any thought behind our versioning?
Yeah, I think we have an issue tracking a stable release. You know, as like we're just still working towards that, and as you can see, there's like still things in flux in the interface between the driver and the providers, you know, I think before we go stable, probably like having more confidence that that interface isn't going to be changing as rapidly as it has. Because we've switched from like execing providers to using gRPC to providers to yeah, there's been, I guess, a lot of churn kind of like on the provider driver interface, and hopefully we are coming to an end to that.
Yeah. And then when we say we'll be stable, what will be the version number at the time?
So for stable release, it'll be 1.0. So the idea is when we do 1.0, basically we don't introduce any breaking changes. So we don't change anything between driver and provider. When we say there is a contract and that is what we're going to abide by, and we will make sure that it's backward compatible. And then also it involves when we find bug fixes, basically patching and then backporting any fixes that we need to. So today we don't backport anything. If we find any bugs, then it's basically just part of the next release.
I think Malik brings up a good point though. Like, I think even pre-stable, right? Maybe we should be doing like maybe like 0.1.0.0.20, allowing us to do patches. Because now the way we have is we can't even have like a release branch, right? Is that what you're thinking, Malik?
Yeah, I mean, the way I was assuming the semantic versioning was, or the way I was following what it's like, the patches are okay, but then we release a certain set of features and we do like probably 0.1.0.0.20 things like that, and we have those features out there and we keep on testing them. And I mean that indicates our sort of a major feature release or and things like that. And patches will of course do along with them. So like I think probably the this atomic file writer probably is like a significant big feature from the driver perspective. So we could have done like a minor version upgrade and have it indicate our user that, you know, that's something big we did. And of course, then once we have everything stable, we move to 1.0 and hopefully we'll stay at 1, as I said, to keep the backward compatibility. Yeah, that's why I was curious. I mean, it's all probably just following some sort of standards or guidelines. So I was curious what we follow here.
Yeah, I think to date we had just been version number goes up up by 1 each time we do a release.
Right.
We had
That's
not
good.
following semantic versioning.
Patch version, actually.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. It's patch.
You bring up a really, really good point, Ali. I'm definitely supportive of cutting like minor versions. Start cutting minor versions.
Is that a doc we should look to create around some guidance around the semantic versioning of the project?
Edware.org.
I mean, we have experience from other projects where we can leverage the same pattern for stable, or even after we cut stable, right? Same concept. It is when we cut a release, it's usually the minor,
Right.
allowing us to support patches and cherry pick onto previous minor releases. We just haven't talked about it because this is something that we said was blocking stable, right? Defining versioning and backward compatibility, or how we do releases. I think there's an issue for this. We just haven't really had time to define it yet. I saw some thumbs up, so for the next release, and I think Tommy, you're cutting that, right? Maybe you'll do the honor cutting V01. That way we could have release branches and do like chair picks for any hot fixes or whatever. We haven't had to do that. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
So what do people think about like do it on the next release?
Yeah, I think it's
Concerns?
fine, but when we do broadcast that to users, we probably need to tell them what V0.1 means instead of all the patch releases that we had until now. Like, does that mean the project is moving to beta, or why are we moving to a minor release now?
Actually, this is exactly what actually I want to understand. Probably we should take some time to just sort of define our process or our guidelines, and then it's easier for us to follow and then communicate to customers, I guess.
Maybe this can be a topic next time for like broader discussion. We can all go research and see what other projects are doing and what's the like recommended SEMVers. Because like Anish mentioned, if it's 0.1, then people might assume it's in beta stage.
Yeah, and we do have our CRDs, right? I think they all are in alpha. So do we tie those version upgrades to our? I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out. Like, what sort of consideration we might want to take into account?
Yeah, the drivers are, I personally think the CRD versioning should be independent because they will have their own definition and release cycle depending on the need of the project. Whereas the drivers, it has its own release cadence. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So who wants to take on this work item to help us define versioning for the driver? I see no links.
Yeah, I can do it.
Cool, thanks.
All right. So that takes us to the end. Any other discussion items or comments?
So just to confirm, the next release is 0.0.22 then?
I think we should continue with that until we have agreement on. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I do think that Anish and I were going to cut a release on Monday, so we're gonna try to do that.
All right. Okay, so that's it. Next meeting will be on the 27th. We'll push Lucas item out about the external secrets. So please, if you got time from now until the next meeting, just take a look at that repo so we're prepared to have a really good conversation about that. And with that, we can go ahead and end the meeting. Thanks, everyone. See you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.